Hello, everyone. So if I'm audible, kindly please respond in the chat and let me know that I'm audible. And I welcome some early audience, Jay, Ratish, Mina. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live stream where we will be discussing about setting boundaries and understanding what is a healthy boundary, how does it resonate with you in particular, and how to ensure that the boundaries you're setting is neither underutilized nor overutilized so that you have a perfect balance. And we will transition that with an example of how to set boundaries when you're working from home. So once again, welcome you all to this live stream. I'm Shreyas. I'm an executive life coach certified by the International Coaching Federation. I've been doing coaching for the past 2 years, where I help senior executives in the IT industry and fellow coaches who want to understand how to set up work-life balance and set up an action plan which will help them reach the goals that they set in both their work and life. So we'll just give a minute more so that we have some more audience joining us across different platforms. And I'm extremely grateful for Curated Club for giving me an opportunity to come and share my few cents with you. So on that note, I think we'll start right with the basic definition of what a boundary means, and then we'll understand what is the difference between setting up just a boundary and making it healthier, wherein it is tailor-made to your particular persona. And we will also understand what questions you might have to ask yourself so that you get the necessary insights into understanding where exactly you are in setting up your respective boundaries, especially since most of us, if not all, are working from home still. I think there is this inherent question about trying to separate your personal life and your work life, and in the end, trying to ensure that you are achieving a good balance wherein one does not intrude with another. So let us quickly dive into the definition of what a boundary can mean. And in the sense of our topic, boundaries do not mean a physical line or a physical barrier, which is evident for everyone to see. So boundaries in today's sense, as in with regards to the topic, is something which is emotional, and in sometimes it can be physical as well, but they can range from being very loose to very rigid, and a good healthy boundary will somewhere fall in between these two limits. So setting boundaries is an important part to establishing one's identity and is also a crucial aspect for your own self-care and mental well-being. So we'll discuss about how to ensure you understand the boundary is healthy for you, how to set them, why it is important for self-care, and how to explain this particular boundary to people that you meet. It can be your relatives, it can be your children, it can be your work colleagues, or anyone that you meet in life in general. So healthy boundary can be defined as the space between you and the other person, the space between you and the other person where you begin, you, that is the person under consideration. So where you begin and the other person ends. So this is the stark difference that you need to understand when setting boundaries. So it is all about you in particular. So a healthy boundary will be a place or a space between you and the other person where you begin and the other person ends. And the very basic purpose of setting a healthy boundary is primarily to protect and take good care of you, your emotional well-being, and also your mental health being. So they are usually set in a way where you feel mentally and emotionally stable. So at least this is what the psychologists try to explain when there are people who are struggling to set boundaries. So healthy boundaries are set to ensure that you are mentally and emotionally stable so that the boundaries are neither too rigid nor too loose, but somewhere in between so that it does not feel non-existent to you. And at the same time, somewhat existent to the other person that you might meet or that you might engage with. So healthy boundaries established to serve one's identity. Specifically, healthy boundaries can help people define their individuality. So this is very key that you need to understand. So boundaries will definitely help you to understand and define your individuality and also help you dictate what you will and you will not hold yourself responsible for. So two main things which goes behind understanding the basics of healthy boundary setting. One is to help yourself define your individuality. And second is to let people know what you will and will not hold yourself responsible for. So these are some key points which you might take down your notes and write it out, or the replay will always be there on all my different social media channels. So you might just want to listen to what I'm speaking and revisit the replay later and make down your own notes. So while we are at it, the boundaries, I said it can be emotional and sometimes it can also be psychological, but boundaries can also be physical at times. For example, declining physical contact from a person you might know of, or it might be a coworker. In some industries can be a really good and important boundary to set. So that way it is physical. And the second part is the emotional aspect that comes from asking that co-worker not to make unreasonable demands on your time and emotions. So there isn't a strict rule that your boundaries cannot be physical, but at any given point of time, it will have some form of an emotional connect to it, which is what differentiates between setting a very rigid boundary where you do not open yourself for any kind of emotions, or a very loose boundary wherein you're open to too many things, which can make you feel overwhelmed and in turn affect your mental health. So advantages, right? You need some points to convince yourself that healthy boundaries are the way to proceed further. So what are some key benefits that are very much visual to you? Number one, as I already mentioned, is good mental health. So your mental health, your emotional well-being is as critical as your physical well-being. So you need to understand that your mental health plays an important role, which probably will affect your productivity when you're working from home, which will affect your family life if you're still working from home and there is no separation between your work and your personal life. And in turn, it will just have an overall impact or influence on the way you show up each day, right? The best example, most of us would have undergone this at one point or the other, the Sunday scaries, right? So until Sunday, we're all good. Sunday afternoon, 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, everything goes well. And suddenly there is this huge pressure that dawns upon us saying that, oh, in another 12 hours or so, it's already Monday and you need to start churning in the hours, you need to start preparing, you need to do that, you need to do this, but time is short, so on and so forth. So why does that happen? I think it is mainly because we do not set the right boundaries, wherein we do not clearly take the rest we need during the weekends. We do not actually plan in advance, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of other conditions that get attached, but the basic part is prevalent in setting the right healthy boundaries. The second thing is very good emotional health. This will definitely have an indirect impact in the way you engage with people because we are sentient beings. We do have emotions that we need to share. Sometimes life just happens, pandemic being a great example, and we need to see how best we handle our emotions so that one, there is proper support for you when you require. You be a proper support to someone who they need, or for probably someone who is in your close circle falls ill and they need some help in undergoing the regular day-to-day activities or help with their work, so on and so forth. So you need to be very good with regards to emotional health as well. The third biggest advantage of setting healthy boundaries is you develop a sense of autonomy. In the sense, you're no longer dependent on what others might think of you. You're no longer dependent on what others might have to do for you to do your job better. You're no longer dependent on others for your own self validation. You're no longer dependent on others to give you the required motivation, because I feel that intrinsic motivation is the best way forward. So for you to develop that intrinsic motivation, for you to develop that sense of autonomy or develop a sense of autonomy, I think setting up healthy boundaries is very crucial. The next advantage is now you get clearer on your identity. When I say identity, it does not mean, yes, I am Shreyas, I know that I am Shreyas. It doesn't mean that identity. It means what your role is in the grand scheme of life, what your role is for your family, what your role is for your company, or if you're an entrepreneur, what is your role towards the people that you employ? And how does that collectively come together to create a life which is on par with your expectations? Because trust me, when life happens, you do have some unrealistic expectations coming in. So that is totally normal. So if you're maintaining it on par, I mean, when I say on par, it's almost 65 to 75%. And if you're an overachiever, probably you might extend up to 85%. So that is one other direct advantage that healthy boundaries can bring in, which helps you develop a sense of identity, a sense of individuality. And an indirect benefit of developing a sense of identity will be, in a way, you can start putting burnout in the backseat. So you don't have to worry about facing burnout issues, because the moment you start segregating things, compartmentalizing things, and you have boundaries for everything, you start working more productively. Number one, it is an indirect benefit. Once again, you start making plans, you start understanding how things work and where you need to put your focus and attention to. And in a way, you start influencing your own behavior and of the people that are closely connected to you, perhaps a team member. So when they see you working in a certain way, it can definitely become a great motivator for people to start imbibing those things. And one crucial thing that comes into picture is it's not wrong to copy people, but just be aware of what will work for you individualistically, because that is one key thing which I said about generating healthy boundaries, is to have a sense of individuality. So when you're copying, just don't blatantly go and copy what others have done. Take those stuff, keep it as a starting point, work in your perspectives, develop your own sense of identity, your own set of rules, own set of boundaries. Always experiment, because there is no hard and fast rule that you should get it the first time right. Most often doesn't happen, because we all start with a least bit of experience, and as you try out, you start gaining the requisite knowledge, the requisite experience. So don't ever hesitate to implement a few things. Even if you want to copy someone blatantly, just imbibe that, see if it works or not. Have the awareness to check in with yourself probably every fortnight or every week, whatever suits well for you and is acceptable to you. So this is a very important point of what all boundaries you set should be really acceptable to you. You should be able to measure it. You should be able to track it and make it as realistic as possible and make it time bound so that you have some form of accountability. So these are some of the advantages that I can think of for having a good, healthy boundaries. And if you have more advantages that you'd like to share, please feel free to drop in your comments, your thoughts in the comments. And the questions that I see, I think I'll just pick it up as and when I complete a segment so that there is no loss of the flow and we can better be able to understand. So Yes, Vignesh, definitely it is a challenge here, considering that the pandemic has brought in some forced changes that we were not ready to accept. So in that sense, yes, it is very much a challenge. And I think it is something which we all can overcome with the right, setting the right intention, having a goal, and implementing an action plan, which is one, acceptable to you. Second, it is measurable. Third is time bound so that you have some form of accountability. I have a question from Meena, which is more or less the same. So I found it a bit challenging to define my responsibilities with my boss. Any suggestions? Um, Meena, I'm not sure what kind of job role you're into, but as a general thumb rule, I would look back into the job description that was handed over to you during your interviews. Have a go through, see what resonates with you, and try to correlate it with the kind of job you're doing currently and the type of job that is being expected by you. And if you have a colleague who is in the same position, and if you can have a chat with them on a general scale without infringing on the personal boundaries that they might have set, I think it's really good for you to have a chat with your colleagues. And if your boss is open to having a discussion, please do go and just approach them for a quick 15-minute chat so that you can better understand your responsibilities. Because basic thing, your communication is key here. So communication with your colleagues, communication with your boss, and communication with you internally. I think that is where that is one thing which you can try out and see if you get an answer to the kind of responsibilities that you need to define for yourself. So, Ratish, do you use any apps or tools to better set boundaries? I do not use any apps personally because that doesn't really fit in the way I work. Because me being a coach gives me that added advantage wherein I know if something works or not. And me being trained in those particular tools helps me better understand than you probably to set boundaries and see that I stay accountable. But what I definitely do is I myself have an accountable partner who is a fellow coach, who was my colleague when I did my course. And we kind of have an interaction every week, at least once a week, trying to understand where we are on our action plan, how have we implemented it, and in the end, understand what needs to be done for the following week. So that keeps me well on track. But if you need to really use any apps, you could probably look at any project management apps like Trello, Asana, Topsado. So I think these are some great apps where you can start making cards and give yourself some reminders. But again, it all depends on how comfortable you are to look into a computer every time you need to track something. A good pen and paper works once again, so you need not have to necessarily look at apps or just have an accountability partner. It can be your parents, it can be your relatives, but just ensure that the accountability partner you choose is equally committed to help you grow so that there is no lacks on part of either you or your accountability partner, which ultimately results in failure of your action plan. So you can work out a variety of options, try it out, experiment, because it's always what fits you well and is acceptable to you that works well in the long term rather than me just giving out a few suggestions. So try out these apps, try out pen and paper, try out an accountability partner and see what works for you. RSP, as a founder of a business, it's been impossible setting boundaries for me. When the buck stops with you, how can you be effective at this? Well, that's a very great question, RSP, because I myself, as a founder of my own coaching business, I went through the same emotions as you. And fortunately or unfortunately, if you're a solopreneur, I think initially your mental health will not be equal to the growth of your startup or growth of your business, because it is you who has that vision. So it is you who will be working more. But having said that, it isn't too difficult to understand what needs to be done. For example, if you're a startup founder and you're working for, say, 12 hours a day, try to bring in a few breaks in between, because I think as humans, your employees will definitely go for a break. So try and see if you can sync out your breaks with those that of your employees or that of your uh, partners that you work with, and divide that 12-hour chunk into, say, probably 3 hours at a stretch, and then take 15, 20 minutes break of what works for you, and then continue doing that. So that is one way where you can probably start implementing your boundaries. Second, understand what projects are feasible to you, what projects make you productive, and what do not. And just don't hesitate to take that hard decision to say no at times, because that is very crucial. I know it is very difficult, because I've committed the same mistake where initially I started taking on more clients than I could handle, just for the sake of getting the revenue, starting to bootstrap my business. Didn't want to have any investors so that my idea wouldn't be diluted. So this is the second thing. So please do not hesitate to say no to projects that demand too much of your time in person. So if at all there is some way where you can start delegating things to your employees, do that, take up the project. If it demands more than, say, 70% of your time, it might be virtual, it might be in person, or it might be a mix of both. Please try and work out if you can say no, or if you can bring in a few more people to help you out with. So these are some suggestions for you to start looking at and explore it, because ultimately, as a business owner, we do have a responsibility. So that shouldn't or that need not translate to sacrificing your own mental health being in order to achieve that particular revenue stream. So break down your working hours, see if you can take regular breaks, incorporate delegation, because as a startup founder, I would highly suggest and emphasize the need for delegation, because that is what will set you up to become an effective leader. And third is the art of saying no. And finally, bringing in a good team who will help you out and so that your work burden is reduced. And finally, I'll be discussing some other tips related to work from home, which can perhaps help you as a founder to set up healthy boundaries. So I guess that answers at least some of the questions that you might all have regarding setting up healthy boundaries. And since I've got many questions related to um, what I sense here is that you're all looking at examples of setting up healthy boundaries, or you might want to understand what do healthy boundaries look like. So let me just answer by giving a few examples that I have seen in my coaching career, coaching executives and business owners. So the first thing would be to set up um, professional boundaries. So it might be boundaries one might set depending on the setting. So that might be very well different from setting a boundary with your family to setting a boundary with your boss or co-worker. So the best example to understand this would be a teacher-student relationship, right? So the teacher might be able to set healthy boundaries by choosing to keep their personal life separate from their professional lives by not talking about that too much with their students or talk about their private lives with the students. So that is one way where a teacher can separate the personal and professional lives with a teacher-student setup. Also, teachers can begin each school year by telling students what they're comfortable with and what they're not. So, for example, they can tell they do not want to hear students talking about illicit activities in the classroom. So, what this essentially does is it is setting a precedent. So, you can start setting precedents in your life where you make it absolutely clear through communication, saying that you are comfortable doing certain things, you're not comfortable doing certain things, come what may. So that is something which you decide based on your personal requirements, your personal obligations, and your um, listening to your own inner self. And one other way where teachers can set boundaries is by telling themselves that they will not hold themselves responsible for every aspect of the student's life. Definitely, there are some aspects where a teacher is responsible, but outside of the school setting or the college setting, I think the teacher might not be able to hold themselves responsible. And in a way, they won't be too hard when a student suffers from something which is out of the teacher's control. So that is one way where you set your emotional boundaries by telling that, yes, this is something where you'll be responsible for. And this is a setting where no matter what, you're just not going to take responsibility. And in a way, it might feel selfish, it might feel audacious to people that are being dealt with, or the other person. That is when I define healthy boundaries, it is where you begin and the other person ends. So for that person, where it ends, I think they might feel it is audacious. They might feel it is too constricting. They might feel it is too, what do you say, egoistic. But do not fall for those trap of emotions, because it does take time for others to kind of respond to the boundaries you set. And it will definitely take time for you to get comfortable setting these boundaries. The second thing is I can give my own example as a coach where I have to connect with my clients so that I am actively listening to them. And in a way, I might get caught up when a client starts sharing something. So how do I set healthy boundaries in such a situation is to start practicing detachment. So I attached by being detached. So whatever they say, I try to put in the third person's perspective, that is from my client's perspective, and do not put myself in that particular situation and try imagining things that if I were in their shoes, or this would be happening to me. So that is one way where I can start creating boundaries or compartmentalize things so that I'm not drawn into those particular stories, which however it might be, because I need to practice my own self-care. I need to manage my stress. The second way I can think of setting boundaries is to practice an exercise called as the grounding exercise, which might be a 10-minute simple meditation. It might be a walk in nature. It might be some exercise that you find gives you a ton of motivation, tons of positive energy. It can just be a good discussion with your parents if that works for you. So try and see if doing a grounding exercise can really work in your favor, because I do that especially after a client has shared a heavy instance which I think might affect me. I immediately go and do a grounding exercise, because as a professional, I need to be responsible 100% when the client is in a session with me. So again, this is something I take responsibility for. What I do not take responsibility for is how it will how to not let it impact me, number one, and second, not being judgmental. So this is where I need to be really careful about. Um, Another simple example can be romantic partnership, because this is very crucial. So the person might either of the partner might be too demanding of each other's time. So the best way to solve this is through communication. So communication is an emotional barrier once again. So you're making yourself pretty clear as to what you can give, what you can offer, and you're also at the same time taking responsibility for yourself by stating that by doing so and so, you are getting so and so stress, or you are being affected in such and such way, or you are not able to do your professional commitments. And it can be whatever reason that might really come up. So you being very clear, you taking responsibility is a good way, and communication is a great way to do that. And finally, boundaries can pretty much be very important in a parent-child relationship. So, for example, parents might ask their child to never enter their bedroom without knocking first. So that is simplest form of asking for privacy. Or children might ask their parents not to read their personal diaries or journals so that they can maintain the privacy of their own Yes, it has some caveats in the example that I'm giving. So just trying to put that aside, this is just an example that I wanted to share so that you start understanding how it is important or how important it is to set up healthy boundaries. How can you do them? Some basic tips um, and a general flow chart, which you might want to take notes of to set personal and emotional boundaries would essentially go like this. One is the first step is to define and identify your desired boundaries. What that essentially means is that examining the boundaries, for example, as a founder, that RSP asked. So you might want to understand what is your identity or identify and desired boundary related to being a founder. For some, it might be dealing with your coworkers or your boss. So you decide what is the boundary that you want to define. Second step is to communicate what you need to ensure you set those boundaries. So it might be communicating with yourself, that is self-talk. You might be communicating it with your boss, with your coworkers, with your employees, with the persons that you're connecting with, that you're engaging with on a day-to-day basis, or it might involve a group of people. So it might involve, say, your friends, coworkers, and your boss, all in a team setup, or it might be individualist. So communicate and say what you need. And while you're doing this, this is where the third step comes in, which is very important. Keep it simple and smart. So do not overcomplicate things. Do not try to over explain yourself because that is not what you want to do. You don't want to explain things beyond what is needed. Make it simple so that you do not use too many complex words. That's the simplest example I can give. You don't have to use your vocabulary or show your sense of hold on the English language or whatever language you choose to communicate with. Just try and make it as simple as possible where even a 10-year-old child can understand that you're asking for so and so things. And finally, this is where it all culminates, which is consequences, right? We often are afraid of what consequence it can bring about. So set your consequences and just make them understand why setting a particular boundary is important for you. What effect will it bring on whatever is it that you're trying to work out? For some, it might be productivity. For some, it might be more family time. For some, it might be maintaining a good balance between work and life. So say why it is important, help them understand what the consequences will be, and try and maintain a good action plan wherein you're showing that progress and you're not doing it just for the sake of telling it, but you're showing something as proof of progress. Um, so this is probably a good flow chart for you to maintain. And the most important thing that you can do is to say no simply but firmly for something you do not want to do. Do not feel that you need to explain your choice for each and everything. Sometimes it just, it doesn't suit or it doesn't align with the values you've set for yourself. Sometimes it might not be in alignment with the progress of your own company. And sometimes it might not be in alignment for you as a founder to do a certain thing right now, but it might probably change in the few years to come. So keep it present. Do not try and bring in the past or the future, because ultimately, past, unfortunately, is done and dusted. Future, unfortunately, is something that can change at a moment's notice. So keep it in the present tense so that you're working with the facts on hand and you're not projecting it with something that you can think will happen in the future. And finally, keep the focus on yourself. This is totally individualistic. So put the focus on you. This is probably one of those instances where focusing on the I statement will not be egoistic. So do not get confused when perhaps you listen to all the other meditation masters or some spiritual master saying that I statements equals egoism. But in this case, the focus to set healthy boundaries is to understand it is not too loose and it is not too rigid, which is where the I statement becomes egoistic. So you're trying to stay in between. That is why it becomes healthy boundaries. That is why it gives you an opportunity to grow further. So keeping the focus on yourself would go like instead of saying you need to stop bothering me after work, you can say I need some time for myself when I get back home from work, or when I finish my work hours and I'm at home. I need some time for myself, or I need some time for my family. So notice the difference between the two statements. You're saying the first statement went like, you have to stop bothering me after work, which is like, this is it. You have no option. You have no rights to ask. You are totally banned from doing this thing. Whereas when you change that perspective into saying, look, I need some time for myself, for my family after work, you are being intentional. You have set the right precedent. You're giving a simple explanation as to why they should not contact you after work. But at the same time, you're also leaving space for those emergency situations where perhaps you're a doctor or you're the plant manager if you're working for big industrial plants. And there is some emergency that comes up which is beyond anybody's control. And if the person has to reach out to you, they will do it without hesitation, and they would probably be more polite about it rather than when you do the first statement where you just bar them from all communication and they start hesitating, and it just becomes something you don't want it to reach out. So that is some things which you need to look at. And you need to really remember that it is impossible to set boundaries without setting consequences, which is to give them a simple explanation, set the consequence, show that this is what will happen by doing so and so or practicing so and so boundaries. So this is something which you need to incorporate in your flowchart, which is the fourth step, which is to set consequences where you explicitly state why they are important for you. So this is something which you need to really remember. So let us quickly transition to setting boundaries when you're working from home. So some quick tips that you might want to follow when you are working from home is to create a dedicated workspace. Like, yes, I know houses come in all sizes, no judgment on the type of house or the size of house you live in. But if you can somehow carve out a corner for yourself where it is dedicated exclusively for work, rather than keeping your entire house open. I mean, if that works for you and you're able to still do it, well and good. But for some, they need this essential physical boundary that is visual to them so that they start separating in their brain. And once they get used to it, perhaps they can start treating their entire house as a workspace, which concurrently I do. Because I do not really like to sit in one place all the time. I keep moving because for me, that flow of energy is equally important. But the same does not go well with my brother. He needs a particular workspace set in a good corner, which has ample lighting, ample air, so that he concentrates there well. And when he's out of that place, it's all fun and chill for him. So both these things work, but for more than 60% of the people that I've worked with, they need a dedicated workspace that they can call work cubicle, which is separate from their home so that they're able to efficiently separate their personal life and professional life. The second important thing that you can do to set boundaries is set your hours. Yes, flexible work life is kind of a big deal nowadays, but if you're trying to keep it too flexible, you might end up overworking. If you kind of keep it too rigid, you might end up underworking. So try and find the ideal flexibility that works for you. For me, it usually is between 8 and 5, 8 in the morning and 5 in the evening. And my company demands me to work 8 hours a day. So I just set up probably 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, depending on what I need to do. And a few minutes here and there, a couple of minutes here and there should be totally fine. But if you're able to do it consistently, you will notice that your productivity is much higher. You feel more engaged in work, and you're also getting the requisite amount of rest and the family time, which in turn translates into good work-life balance. And when I say you have to do 9 to 5, it doesn't mean that most of the days you do 9 to 5. There are some days where you might have to do 9 to 7, especially when the project deadlines are nearing by or you have some other commitments to do, and that is totally okay. So do not feel too rigid about missing out that 9 to 5 schedule. It's totally normal if a few days extend, or you might have to put in the extra hours to bring in a good result. So that is how you can work. And if you're in a remote team setup, probably you can just take a cue from Skill Crush, because that is where I refer to this particular idea, where you can create a spreadsheet of everyone's hours so that you have a proper meeting time where you can schedule at the right time where everyone is available, and you do not kind of infringe on hours where you might be taking a break and the other one wants to schedule a meeting. So this particular thing, especially in my team setup, has worked really well because I work across 3 different time zones. So setting up an Excel sheet with our work hours will automatically help schedule the meetings at the right time. 90% of the time, there is always that 10% chance where you need to be a really little bit flexible in order to incorporate the requirements of the team. Please emphasize on taking proper breaks, because that is one thing which will help you reset both your energy physically and mentally, as well as giving you the time to just stretch your body and get that lethargy out so that it does not accumulate over a period of time and you start really feeling tired and in no mood to continue the break. So put it on a calendar. If you can't really remind yourself, make a calendar note, schedule it across your different time zones if you're working across time zones, so that that lunch break is essentially yours and yours only. And you might probably want to use it to socialize. That is totally well and good, but use it to take a break. And an extension to that would be to taking your days off very, very seriously, because especially if your home doubles up as your office, it is very much easier to just shift some of your week work into your weekend. And this particular thought of just one quick thing will just blow out to becoming a full-fledged 9 to 5 work schedule, which you don't want to do, because that will prevent you from taking the rest you need. That will just ensure your boss might just dump on more work because you're ready to do the work on weekends. You might start feeling that your balance is off between your work and life. So just try and find one day of the week. It need not be weekend at all, because my work days usually starts on a Tuesday. So Monday is when I take an off. And work from home setup just gives me that flexibility to take a different day off and work on Saturday. So you might want to find that one day of the week where you're totally off, no screens, no emails, no phone calls, and you are 100% invested into your self-care, into your family, and into a few hobbies that you might be doing. Last but not the least, this is one thing which has effectively worked for me, which is to find a work ritual. So at a typical office, you'd have your mug. So maybe one of your weird coworkers would try to steal it because it has the biggest handle, or you have to awkwardly confront your work colleague, because it has happened to me. I had a very big coffee mug, which had a very good, interesting design printed, and my colleagues were really envious. So when you work from home, when you're working from home, you might not have this chance to have a friendly fight, but A surprisingly good tip is to have a designated work mark. So it doesn't matter what kind of a mark it is, but whatever feels good to you, just grab that mark from the kitchen, have it on your table, pour yourself a good amount of coffee, tea, or whatever drink you choose to have, sip at it, and once that is done, ensure you go take a break, do the dishes or whatever is left in the kitchen. That will become a good activity for you to just have a change of scenery and then come back, start doing your work. So what this does is essentially gives you a break. You're able to sip in and enjoy the drink of your choice. You're reminded of something which it was essentially your office thing. So you're having that mindset where when you have that particular thing on your table, you're into that work setup. So it is all about tricking your brain into really reliving those moments as if you were in the office. And the other benefit is you just get to make a fake commute, right? People miss that part when they go to office. So you can just have a stroll from your room to the kitchen or one round outside in the courtyard or just outside your room, stare at the road for a few minutes. Or if you have a park nearby, just enjoy the scenery, come back, take a quick sip of water, sit back, and you will ensure you will probably notice that you're able to focus on your work much more easier. It just becomes natural for you and it becomes a routine. So you don't have to really think of making it a habit because it does not require too much effort. Finally, find your work from home community. You always need not constantly work in solitude. So setting up some co-working days all with your friends or someone that you meet on social media so that probably once a month you make an event out of it, try and spend the first couple of hours in the morning or the final couple of hours in the evening to do some chill and fun events or just try and exchange each other's portfolios and see what are your common interests. Just have a chat going, communicate, and you will notice that you're far more supported and you feel far more accountable to keeping your work and life, personal life separate. And in the end, it just becomes easier for everyone that is involved when you start um, becoming more productive in the end. The final tip that I'd like to give for today would be to declutter both your physical and the mental space. So you might have heard numerous authors talk about this, especially Marie Kondo. She talks about decluttering both your physical and mental spaces in a best-selling book. So you indirectly spark the joy and become more organized. So I think the book is called Joy at Work, Organizing Your Professional Life, if I'm not mistaken. So it's by Marie Kondo. So she provides tactics and advice on how to declutter, how to maintain your physical space and your digital workplace clean, how to organize your tasks, your emails, your work schedules, your meetings, and whatnot, and also have an optimal dedicated office area in your home, however big or small it might be, which totally depends on what you can carve out. And just follow a few of her advices, and you will ensure that you're on the right track to achieving setting up a healthy boundary. And less clutter will also decrease your levels of stress and anxiety. Because this is one thing which I work constantly with my clients who are senior management executives and fellow coaches. So the first thing that I tell them when they come in with the question of stress and anxiety is to start decluttering. And for some of them, it has become a good ritual. So every weekend, they just make it a task to go and clean their workspaces, to go and clean their homes, clean their vehicles, and probably whatnot. So they just start cleaning, and it becomes a good activity to blow off steam. And finally, a routine will always work. If you can set one and stay true to it, well and good. If you can't, It's totally okay. Just keep experimenting. I'm sure you will click on that magic routine that will work for you and wherein you do not have to put in much efforts when you're trying to set those healthy boundaries. So I think these are some ways where you can start setting up healthy boundaries, start experimenting with it, try and understand what works well for you, be aware, experiment, see if it is acceptable to you, if it is measurable, yeah, and make it time bound so that you have something to let you stay accountable. So far we have discussed the definition of healthy boundaries, which is the space between you and the other person where you begin and the other person ends. We have seen the advantages of setting healthy boundaries, which are you define your sense of individuality, you ensure your self-care, you ensure your mental and emotional well-being, you get a sense of autonomy, you're more productive, and overall it has an indirect influence on your productivity. We've seen a few examples of how to set healthy boundaries and what it can mean in different setups. So ultimately, there is no one size fits all. So try and experiment a few things and see what works for you. And ultimately, we have also seen how setting up boundaries for work from home can help, some tips for you that you can try, and just hit me up with any suggestions, any questions on my social media channels. I'm most active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I'll be able to get back to you with an answer. If you have any doubts, just look at the replay, try and make some notes. If you want to share those notes with me for your feedback, I'm more than open to taking those in my DMs. And now coming to a few more questions. Santosh, I'm a doctor and COVID has been a nightmare for me. I feel guilty when I don't pick up calls and I'm worried that it might be some emergency. Santosh, first of all, I really thank you for the service you're doing as a doctor. And I do know it is very, very difficult because my own sister is a doctor and she works at least 14 hours in a COVID ward. Now she has moved out, but I do understand the tension and the stress that goes behind it. So the first thing that I always say, please do not feel yourself responsible for saying no because you're probably tired. You do not want to do it after work hours. It's your family time. Yes, I do understand it might be some emergency, but please do keep in mind as a doctor, it is imperative for you to be a 100% committed to dealing with that particular patient because it is more or less similar as a coach because we are professionals and we have a sense of responsibility to ensure we offer the best of our services. So that is one thing you're responsible for. What you're not responsible for is to deal with each and every patient, especially after your work hours when you've had a long day, or perhaps you yourself are feeling low because just try to imagine if you're going in, say, with 70% efficiency, isn't there a chance where you might try and misdiagnose or you might feel impaired in your decision making? So there are some other risks that you can really think of. So please do not feel guilty at all because sometimes, the times are really very, very difficult. There are more patients that are coming down with COVID than the medical professionals can handle. So I think it is totally okay to have that particular space after your work hours, especially during the night when you're not feeling good for yourself. So two things, please do not hesitate to saying no. Please do not feel responsible for things which are beyond your control. Third, just look at how well you can manage things. If there is some form of forwarded call service that you can subscribe to, wherein you probably would be able to forward the call to another doctor who is on call or who is at the hospital, or if you could forward it to an healthcare professional who might be able to give better advice, please work out some alternate solutions so that you start feeling less worried and ultimately you start feeling less guilty. I hope that answers. I'm not a medical professional, so my understanding is very limited, but these are few examples for you to try and look what works best for you. Meena, what do you feel about 4-day work weeks? Personally, it's subjective because I can vouch for my productivity even working for 3 days a week or 5 days a week. So it really depends on the type of profession, the type of organization, and the type of work that is necessary, especially if there is a project on hand. Since I work in research and development, whenever the deadlines are close, I just cannot manage with even 7 day a week because we need to ensure that the data is as accurate as possible so that the end customer does not suffer for our wrongdoings. So it depends on the situation, in fact. So in a general setting, yes, 4-day work week just is good enough as a 5-day work week or a 7-day work week. But one thing to note is people often misunderstand the number of hours worked is equal to number of productivity hours, which is not the case at any given point of time because we are not 100% efficient when it comes to doing things. And there's definitely a lack of some form of efficiency. So when you say you're working for 8 hours a day, your productive hours might range from 3.5 hours to 4 hours. So the more you increase your productivity, I think the 4-day work week will make more sense. But again, you do not need to force yourself to doing more productive hours because ultimately for some 5-day week keeps them occupied, keeps them having a healthy balance. And in some ways, we'll just give them the necessary change that is required. So yes, if it feels acceptable to you, if it feels measurable to you, why not? 4-day work a week is kind of a blessing. If not, it's totally fine to have a 5-day, 6-day week as long as you know that you have a perfect, I'm sorry, not perfect, but an ideal work life balance because perfect, once again, is just imaginary. Life happens, so it cannot be perfect. Um, so again, 10 hours a day, if it is healthy for you, it is healthy for you. If it isn't, it isn't. So again, it is very much personalized because there are days where I've done 12 hours a week, 12 hours a day, a week in succession. And I have not found to have had any mental health issues because I love doing what I do. My work is something which I'm very passionate about. So having that interest, having that passion definitely helps working even 10 hours a day or plus. While for some, it might just not be the case. They might be forced to work for 10 hours and it might just not become healthy at all. So again, personalized, which is acceptable to you, is the magic formula for ensuring something works for you or to realize that something doesn't. I do not really know your particular case, Meena, but if you're feeling that 10 hours a day is related or resulting in you making some unhealthy life choices, yes, you need to be setting better boundaries. You need to be properly communicating this with your boss, your coworkers, or the people that are involved. You need to be setting a good precedent for yourself. And finally, you need to ensure that you set the consequences for the people that are involved. So if you say, if you ask me if I need to set better boundaries, again, that will be individualistic to you. So you need to understand if working 10 hours a day feels acceptable to you. If your mind tells it is not, trust your instinct, it is not healthy for you. Please try to make changes at a reasonable time because once again, I'm not sure of what your situation is. So the magic formula, personalized, acceptable, measurable, time bound. So if it fits all these 4 criteria, you're doing your best that you can and you're having a healthy boundary. If any one of these 4 conditions are not matching or it's not in alignment with you, I'm sorry, but you need to start setting better boundaries. Um, Ratish, yes, I can definitely share. Let me check. So it's either Trello or Asana that you can use to set up your different goals, to keep track of your goals and have an action plan. Few more examples of grounding techniques. Ours, it is very much personal. So what works for me is a quick 15-minute meditation that I've practiced where I listened to some mental statements from, I think it is Dane here. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, or Gary Douglas. He has a very good set of mental statements that goes on loop in the alpha stage, I guess. So that is something which you can start practicing. It is something which is not mandatory, but that is where I look at, because music kind of distracts me a bit. So I usually listen to those mental statements, which helps me affirm certain things. Second thing is you can practice a set of affirmations, which usually starts with I am. So you can add a good set of positive affirmations after the word I am. I think I put up the post on LinkedIn. Do check it out. I'll try to link it after the live stream ends, where you can start looking at I am statements and repeating it consecutively for how many ever number of times you want until you feel grounded. The third thing that really helps me is to just take a stroll in nature. I have a very good park nearby, so I take a stroll of around 15 to 20 minutes, not long, not short, because this is not an exercise to lose your added weight, on a lighter note, but it is something to just clear your mind. There is no particular what do you say, condition on the pace that you need to walk, the things that you need to do. You absolutely think nothing. It is just your time and you spend time with nature. What else? Meditation, nature walks, journaling. That is one thing which you can definitely try. Put down all your notes, all your thoughts, all that you've been thinking throughout the day into a pen and paper. Perhaps just close it out. Do not ever read it again until one day where you have that realization and you want to see how far you've come. That is when you'll open. Otherwise, just put down your notes, pen your thoughts. Do not think about whether it's grammatically correct, whether you're using the right language. As long as it makes sense to you, just put it down, maintain a journal. The biggest thing that works for me is saying gratitude. So gratitude journaling, wherein you express your gratitude to each and everything that you've come across. It can be people, it can be inanimate things, it can be animals, whatever you can find. So you can just be grateful for. Do it, pen your thoughts, read that every week, and I'm sure you will definitely find you're able to better ground it, and you feel your mental health is also on track. I think, yeah, my pleasure, Ratish and Meena. So glad that you guys came and asked questions. I think we are well past the allotted time. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to drop it down on either on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whenever you have the chance to view at the replay. I will try my level best to get back at it. Or alternatively, you can keep following me on these social media channels, wherein I regularly post content about a wide range of topics related to personal and professional development. And I would be more than excited to answer all of your questions. And I hope this session was meaningful and your 1 hour was well spent. So on that note, I will meet you all in the next live stream. Until then, please take care, stay safe, and have a great rest of the week ahead. So this is Shreyas signing off. Take care.